All right. Let's get started. A couple of regulars still aren't here, but that's their fault for being late, I guess. Okay, can everyone see the screen?
Can you blow it up a little?
Yes.
Yes.
Is that better?
Thank you so much.
You're welcome. Probably even better.
That's even better.
Okay. All right. So we are now in Parshat Vayetzei, which we're fully in the throes now of Yakov and the unfolding drama of him and his family, which will be the focus for the rest of Sefer Breshit. Vayetzei, of course, begins with Yakov on the run from Esav, his famous dream with the angels and the ladder. We'll talk about that over Shabbos, perhaps. And then his time in Lavan's house, marriage to Leah and Rachel, Bilhah and Zilpah, and by the end of this parsha, 11 of the Shvatim, 11 of his children are born. So it's a lot happens here, and I wanted to spend some time. This is totally inspired from a shir that I heard from Rabbi Yitzchak at Shalom. We've heard some other Torah of his in the past. He has many lectures available on YU Torah and other websites. Really has a nice, interesting take on things. And this is his. This is me repackaging what he had to say. So hopefully I'll do it some justice. We enter the parsha, of course, with biases and with preconceived notions of how things are and how things should be. And one of those key factors is our opinion of Lavan, right? Lavan being Rivka's brother, Yaakov's uncle, to whom Yaakov runs away. And what do we think of Lavan as we enter into the parsha?
He's decent then, isn't he? Isn't he? He's welcoming, isn't he?
So yes, he seems to be welcoming, but that seems to go counter to what I think we're supposed to think of him, right? We're supposed to see him as the bad guy.
Right.
What are some of the things that why do we think of him in such a bad, negative terms?
What is an Aramaean?
What is an Aramaean? Someone from Aramea.
Thank
from
you.
Aram Naharayan.
Okay.
Yeah.
So when
His father's
the servant comes to ask Rivka
Right.
to marry his master, Lavan seems to be mostly interested in the jewelry.
Right. So we have. It's not even before that. It's interesting that Lavan seems to take the lead in the negotiations and in whatever's happening as far as welcoming the servant in, as far as being the one who accepts the gifts. Lavan, remember, is the son or the brother. It's not his house. He's not the one in charge, and yet he seems to take charge. He seems to take control. Right. We certainly Rashi quotes the Midrashim that he is much more interested in the jewelry, and that repeats itself seemingly in our parsha as well. When we're told that Lavan hugs Yakov. Rashi quotes the Midrash that he was looking again. The last time someone from this branch of the family came, they were carrying great wealth. So maybe the same is true with Yakov, and that's why Lavan hugs him and is so enthusiastic to greet him into the home. And is a little disappointed to find out that Yakov has nothing. Why else do we think, are we trained to think that Lavan is the bad guy?
Because of the Haggadah.
Because of the Haggadah, right? Source number one, it's right in front of you. Right? This is how, at least according to one major opinion, this is the essential telling of the story of Pesach. We begin with Lavan, and the Haggadah kind of informs us or biases us to think that that we're supposed to see the whole beginning of the trials of Bnei Israel in Egypt, starting with Lavan, right? And Lavan, what Lavan did was much worse than Paro. Why? Because Paro lo gazar al hazecharim. The Lavan bikesh lakor takol. Paro only decreed against the Jewish boys. Lavan wanted to uproot everything. He wanted to destroy the Jewish people before we even began. Shene'emar arami oved avi vayerd mitzrayma vayagar sham bimtei ma'at vayisham l'goy gadol atzum barav. As it says, how we translate this is a major point of contention. But the way the Haggadah tells us we should translate it is, an Aramean sought to destroy my father, and that Aramean being Lavan. Right? The simpler way to translate this verse might be that my father was a wandering Aramean. And who would that be referring to?
Abraham Avinu.
Abraham. Yeah. Right? That Abraham, right? We're telling the history of the Jewish people. Who do we start as? We started with Abraham, who was a landless, wandering person. And now look at us once we left Egypt. But nonetheless, the Haggadah tells us that we should start with Lavan, and Lavan, we're told, wanted to uproot and undo everything before it even started. So the whole thrust of the Shir is to see, well, was Lavan really such a terrible person? And if he was indeed a terrible person, what is it that made him so terrible in the Torah, right? It's very easy, right? We did the same thing when we hinted at this with Esav, right? It's very easy to read back into the Chumash and see how bad of a guy Esav was. But if our starting point is the Chumash and not the Midrashim and Gemaras and Rashis that we were taught from a young age, so then it's not so clear that Esav was such a bad guy, at least up to the point where he vows to kill Yakov. And so the same might be true with Lavan. Is he really a bad guy from the get-go, or is there something crucial in the story where it changes it? What exactly, from the Torah's perspective, should we be thinking of Lavan? Okay, that's kind of the roadmap for where we're going to go. So our starting point is source number 2. This is after Yakov has his dream. I'm going to read in the Hebrew, so please, when it's time to scroll down to the next page, someone let me know. So after Yakov has his dream and he makes the vow that if he returns safely to the place where he was or to his father's home, then he will faithfully serve God. Whole question about the transactional nature of his promise or his vow, but that's not for tonight. After the dream of Vayetzei Yakov Raglav Vayelech Artza B'nei Kedem. So Yaakov continues on his journey. Vayar v'hinei be'er b'sadeh v'hinei sham shlosha edrei tzon rovtzim aleha k'min ha'be'er hu yashku ha'adrim ha'even ha'adarim ha'even gdola al pi ha'be'er. And he lifts his eyes and he sees that there are 3 shepherds with flocks of sheep waiting to remove the stone from on top of the well. V'nesvu shama kol ha'adrim v'galu et ha'even me'al pi ha'be'er v'yishku et hatzon v'yishivu et ha'even al pi ha'be'er limkoma. Right, they would all gather to the well. They would remove the stone and give water to their sheep, and return the stone, so presumably no one else would steal their water. Vayomer lahem Yaakov achai me'ayin atem, vayomru mecharan anachnu. So Yaakov sees them. He says, "Where are you from? We're from Haran." Vayomer lahem hayidazmet Lavan ben Nachor, vayomru yadanu. Do you know my cousin or my uncle Lavan, the son of Nachor? Yes, we know him. Vayomer lahem hashalom lo, vayomru shalom. How's he doing? He's doing fine. Here, his daughter Rachel is coming with the sheep. Stop right there. So our first introduction to Lavan is that the shepherds of the local place know him, and his daughter is coming with the sheep to give them water. What does this tell us about Lavan?
That he has no sons.
He has no sons. Key data point number 1. He has no sons. Why do we say that? Gary, why do you say he has no sons?
Because clearly tending sheep is men's work. It was clear at the time.
Right. So presumably, although it's interesting because if we think back a generation earlier, who was getting water at the well when the servant comes down?
Rivka?
Rivka. And there clearly were boys in that family because she had a brother Lavan. He
Right.
took care of the negotiations. So
Maybe in that family, the custom is for the women to take care of the sheep.
maybe that's the upshot of it. But presumably Lavan doesn't have sons, right? That certainly is how everyone would read it, that he doesn't have sons, or it seems a bit odd or point of interest that it's his daughter who's taking care of the sheep. And so that seems to be the most logical explanation. Anything else that we can tease out about Lavan from this introduction to him?
He had some
I've
wealth.
always wondered what the tone of voice would be in answer to the question, do you know Lavan?
Right. So
We know him or something
so
like that.
he's at least he's known in the community. Again, I don't know what the social dynamics were back then, how big Haran is, but at least he was known. Someone said he has some wealth because, right, presumably he
Has
has a
sheep?
flock of sheep. So Rabbi Shalom says yes and no. If he had real wealth, his daughter wouldn't be tending to the sheep. If he had real wealth, he would have had a son tending to it, or he would have hired someone else to do it. So he's in the middle class. He's making a go at it. Things are okay, but he doesn't seem to be exceedingly wealthy. Is the point Rabbi Shalom wanted to make? Anything else that we know about him at this point?
Well, I'm not sure I agree. If you had enough money, would you buy more sheep or hire somebody?
Okay, it's a fair point. I don't know. I've never tended sheep. I don't know what the economics were. Right. He also wanted to make the point that it'll become more clear in a moment, but how old do we think Rachel is in this? Any thoughts as to how old she is?
Likely older than 3, maybe a teenager
Okay,
or a little older.
teenager or older. Everyone agree with Rena's assessment?
Yes.
I've known plenty of 4-H young people who've taken care of sheep and have gone to sheep festivals, but
How old are those 4-H people?
well, some of them are 8 years old, 9 years old, but they only had to take care of one sheep,
Right.
as far as I know. So to take care of a whole flock, I agree that it's probably a teenager.
Okay.
At least.
So Rabbi Et Shalom wanted to argue that she must be younger than that. Why? Because flip down to source number 3, right? Yakov is with Lavan now for a little bit, and Lavan says to him in
Oh, yeah.
in verse number, where are we? Let's pick up in 14. Vayom lo Lavan, ach atzmi v'sariata, vayeshiv imo chodesh yamim. Right? Oh, you're my flesh and blood. You're my relative. So Yaakov stays with him for a month. Vayomer Lavan liYaakov, achi ata va'avadatani chinam hagira liyima maskortecha. Okay, so he's been with them for about a month now, and Lavan says to him, "Okay, no, let's make a more realistic arrangement here. What's your salary? What do you want?" Right? So Lavan is offering him a job. Right? So at this point, Lavan seems to be going beyond what would be expected of him. Right? To offer to pay Yaakov a salary, it's enough that he's giving him a place to stay. But he wants to give Yaakov a way of making a living. And so what does Yaakov say back? So he says, he sees the 2 daughters. I want to marry Rachel. So Lavan says, fine, I'll give her to you in marriage. Work for me for 7 years, and then you'll be able to marry her. So Rabbi Et Shalom wants to say that he never would have agreed to 7 years for a daughter of marriageable age, right? This was the way that business took place. This is the way that families got money, is by marrying off their daughters, right? So if he agrees to 7 years, he wants to say that it must be that she was quite young, 5 or 6, so that in 7 years she would be of marriage. Yeah. it doesn't sit right with us, right? It doesn't sit right with us. But he says that, you know, that's what he wants to say. There's some good logic to it. You know, again, you have the midrashim that Rivka was 3 years old when she was tending to the camels and agreed to
Yeah,
marriage.
didn't see
Yeah,
her.
again,
A
doesn't sit
3-year-old
well
and
with
a
us.
camel, that's not a good combination.
Yeah.
How about Rachel was shapely but 5 years old?
Yeah.
Yeah, so how we
I
read
have
that?
a problem.
Okay. So he wanted to say that meant that maybe she was more healthy, you know, she was the one more fit for tending to the sheep. But yeah, it doesn't. It's a point of contention. I don't know that we need to take it literally, but that also explains another key piece to this whole story, because what happens? Yaakov works for 7 years. Says, okay, it's been 7 years. I want to get married now. And what does Lavan do?
Tricks him.
He tricks him.
Yeah.
Okay, so he tricks him, and how does he justify this trick?
That it's not our custom to marry off the younger daughter before the older. Are there any midrashic, I don't know what, ideas as to how much older Leah was than Rachel?
We don't know how much older she was, but the point that he wanted to make, Rabbi Echelon wanted to make, is that Lavan, in agreeing for Yaakov to work for 7 years, had every intention that in those 7 years, Leah would be married off, right? And he would probably have grandchildren by that point from Leah. So when Leah's not married at the conclusion of 7 years, that's when he pulls the switch on her. And he says, you know, what were you thinking? Did you really think, you know, you didn't get an invitation to your cousin's wedding? Did you really think that we would still go through and let Rachel get married before Leah? Right, and then it kind of plays off the next verse we have in the Medrash. The Medrash, before we get to the Medrash, right? So Yakov only figures out that he's been tricked in the morning. How does he not know it earlier? How does he not know it right away?
They had passwords or something.
Okay, so
Rachel had
Rashi
given-
tells us, right, the Gemara that Yaakov knew that Lavan was a trickster. Again, assuming that Lavan was bad, was wicked and evil and mean from the get-go. So he works out some passwords and codes with Rachel, and Rachel doesn't want her sister to be embarrassed, so she shares the password with her. More.
Also, in some Goyish weddings, the groom can get pretty drunk.
Yeah, okay. Some Jewish weddings too, but yeah, it could be that alcohol figures into it. But what was going on from the time that Yaakov agrees to this arrangement with to marry Rachel, and for the 7 years that he's working, what's he doing? He's tending
says
sheep.
that-
He's tending
Yeah.
sheep. How do you tend sheep? What does it mean to tend sheep?
He talks about it later on about how hard he worked, and
Yeah.
he didn't have sleep, and he was out in the cold, and
Yeah,
so
he's
Right.
out leading the sheep from one pasture land to the next.
Yeah, exactly.
Point is, he's not in the house.
Yeah.
He doesn't have much to do with Rachel and Leah. And if at the time when he first saw them, they were young girls, prepubescent, before marital age, right? There would be a lot of physical changes that they went through now that he's getting now between then and when he's marrying them. So if he doesn't spend much time in the house, it's not so crazy that he might get the sisters confused in the darkness and the excitement of the wedding. Maybe there was alcohol, maybe not, but it's not so far-fetched that with everything going on that maybe he wasn't able to recognize as well as we would have thought he should be able to. Again, an interesting argument. We could take it or leave it. But look at this midrash in source number 4. Then we'll go back to Lavan's response to Yakov. So the medrash is picking up a little bit later in the parsha, where we're told that Leah merits to have children because God sees that she was snuah. we translate as hated or least favored less than Rachel. So the Medrash wants to know why did Yaakov not like Leah? Well, why was she snuah? Why was she not liked? And it says it's because she scolded him. How did she scold him? So I'm going to pick up. I think in the English it's right where it's bolded. Vayhi ba'erev vayikach et Leah bito. So Lavan takes Leah, his daughter, and gives her to Yaakov instead of Rachel. Kol halayla hayta asa atzma kerachel. So the entire night she makes herself out to be Rachel. Kevan she'amad baboker v'hinei Leah amar la bat haramai lama ramitz oti. So in the morning when he sees that it's actually Leah, not Rachel, he sees, you daughter of a swindler, why did you trick me? Amra lo. Yata lama rimita avicha. You think I'm the swindler? You did the same exact thing to your father, Yakov. Amar lecha hazot b'ni Esav. Amarta lo anochi Esav v'chorecha. When he went to take the bracha, right? Yitzchak says to you, "Are you my son Esav?" And you answered him, "Yes, I'm Esav." Now you're asking me why I tricked you. You did the exact same thing. Because she gave him musar, because she gave him rebuke. That's why Yaakov starts to not like her, finds disfavor in his eyes. Sorry, Robert, what was your question?
How does Lavan know what happened between Yakov and his father and brother? Did Yakov, in effect, give a rundown of why he had to move out of the country?
Yes.
Or
the Midrash certainly assumes that, and it makes sense if you show up on someone's doorstep and want to live, living there for 7 years.
Yeah.
Either
Something's wrong at home.
Something's wrong at home. Probably the story would have come out at some point.
Mm.
Esav could tell them.
Well, if Esav, yeah, it's a good question. Why doesn't Esav come chasing at, it's the first place I would have looked if I were Esav. Is back, at uncle's house. But the Medrash certainly assumes that the story is known, and it's not so far-fetched, I don't think, that it would be known. Okay.
And wasn't there another midrash that says that Leah's eyes were weak because she was crying all the time because she was
didn't want to marry
supposedly,
Esav, right?
yeah.
Right. Yeah. So go back to Lavan's justification to Yaakov about why he switched the daughters. Right. It was suggested that maybe the same exact argument that Leah makes in the Medrash is what Lavan was making here. Right. Right. The way of our city, the way of our land is that we always let the older daughter always gets married first, right? Unlike Yaakov, where you come from, where it might be okay for the younger son to steal the bracha destined for the older son, we don't do that here. So Lavan is giving Yaakov perhaps some musar, so anyway, so that's the next stage in our analysis.
Promised him in the first place?
I heard another rabbi in a Bar Torah say that Leah had a guilty conscience and she wasn't actually hated, which upset me terribly because it says beferish. God saw that Leah was hated. Now, God doesn't know. I mean, that made no sense to me. Is there any justification for that point of view? That Leah was just projecting onto Yakov her own feelings of guilt.
There's not much textual
There's
justification.
nothing there.
I mean,
That's what I
certainly,
thought.
In the same way that we're trained to think badly of Lavan, we're trained to think highly of Yaakov. So it's quite problematic for the Torah to tell us that
She was hated.
his wife.
Yeah.
So that's probably where that comes from, is trying to redeem Yaakov in one way or another.
Well, in the notes to the Chumash, it says love and hate are only relative terms. That he was not.
Yeah.
she's
Right.
not loved as much as Rachel.
Right.
Yeah.
Snuah doesn't necessarily, in modern Hebrew, we snow means to hate. In biblical Hebrew, there's ample evidence that it doesn't necessarily mean strong hatred. It might mean liked less, the least liked, but not necessarily active hatred. But it doesn't seem to have been a positive relationship.
Does Lavan know that Yakov prefers Leah?
That Yakov prefers Rachel.
Rachel, yeah.
I mean, that's who
yeah.
Yakov
That's the
asked to
thing.
marry. And he's upset that
Yeah.
he doesn't marry her initially. Does he know that Yaakov and Leah's relationship might be rocky? It doesn't seem to be a secret, right? And we know the whole thing with Reuven and the Dudaim, the mandrakes, whatever mandrakes are. It doesn't seem to be a secret that Leah was not his favorite. Again, whether there was actual hatred, we don't know for sure, but it seems to have been open and known that Yaakov and Leah were not, were not the strongest of the couples. So anyway, so that's our next step. Again, our big question is when does Lavan become the bad guy, or does he become the bad guy? So certainly he tricks Yakov, but he seems to have good reason for it. And if you add in the midrashic Musar lesson that he and Leah give Yakov, it's still an up in the air question. Is he really acting unfairly and correctly at this point or not? The next step in this whole thing is after the birth of Yosef, when Yaakov says, okay, it says to Lavan, now he's been with Lavan, presumably, at least for
14 years.
18 years, 14 years, right? 7 years working. He's now have 11 children. So we don't know if any of the pregnancies were concurrent or not, but he's been there at least 14, 15, if not longer, if not more years. And so Yaakov says, okay, I'm ready to go back to my land. Send me Tina. I'm in source number 5. Sorry, let me scroll down. Tina nashai ve'et yaladai asher avadati otcha vahen ve'ocha ki ata yadata devotai asher avadaticha. Right? Give me my wives, my children. I'm ready to go. Vayomer elav Lavan imnam asatichim v'necha nichashni v'chini Hashem b'galecha. So Lavan says, fine, but give me a bracha first. Vayomer nekavas charcha alai va'etena. Right, and tell me what your payment is, and I'll give it to you. Vayomer elav atay yadata. And this is what someone referenced earlier, where Yaakov says, I worked so hard for you. I did so much, and this is. And the whole thing that he sets up with the spotted and the speckled, and again, things I don't understand. I've tried many times to understand what's going on with the spotted and the speckled sheep. I don't get it. But anyway, so Yaakov agrees and something. What's going on at this point? So Rabbi Echelon wants to say that here Yaakov, up until this point, has been kind of a salaried worker. He's been working, he's been providing for Lavan, presumably getting food, a place to live, shelter. But now he wants some capital. He wants some equity that he can take with him as he's getting ready to leave. Okay, so it's kind of a change in the dynamic, a change in what Yaakov's focus is. He no longer just wants a regular paycheck. He wants something that he can put in the bank and take home with him. And that's what's going on. Here we get to what becomes, I think, the key episode in our unfolding drama between Yaakov and Lavan. Chapter 31. Vaishma et divrei b'nei Lavan lemor, lakach Yaakov et kol asher la'avinu, u'me'asher la'avinu asa et kol hakavod hazeh. Yaakov overhears the sons of Lavan saying, Yaakov has taken everything that was our father's. And it's our father's wealth, it's our father's riches that Yaakov has taken for himself. Vayar Yaakov epnei Lavan, v'hinei inenu imo kitmol shilshom. And Yaakov sees Lavan's face that he's not with him as he was previously. Vayomer Hashem al Yaakov, shuv el eretz avotecha u'moladatecha ve'yeh imach. God tells Yaakov, go back to the land where you were born. And so Yaakov then calls in Rachel and Leah. He calls them into the field. So presumably he's scared that someone's eavesdropping. Vayomer lahen roeh ani pnei avichen ki hinenu elai kitmol shilshom. Velokei avi haya imadi. I see that your father is not with me as he was previously, and God spoke to me. You know that I served your father loyally and with all my strength. And your father tried to cheat me several times and he didn't. Right? And he tells them about the spotted and the speckled. And what's the response of Rachel and Leah?
We're ready to go.
We are ready to go. So verse number 14. Vatan Rachel v'Leah v'tomarna lo ha'od lanu chelik v'nachala b'beit avinu. Do we still share an inheritance in our father's house? No, we have nothing here. There's nothing left for us. We're ready to go. What is going on here? What prompts Yaakov to say that he's ready to leave?
Overhearing that conversation,
Overhearing the conversation. And who's conversing?
the sons of Lavan.
B'nai Lavan, the sons of Lavan.
Okay,
we
were
say
they
about-
born?
What did we say about Lavan at the beginning?
That
He had no sons.
He had no sons.
Right.
Okay, so as Yaakov is busy building his family, presumably Lavan is still building his family too. So now there are sons that are in the picture. What happens when the sons are in the picture?
The daughters get disinherited.
The daughters get disinherited, right? So when Rachel and Leah say, "Ha'od lanu chelek v'nachala b'beit avinu," do we still have any inheritance in our father's home? What are they saying to him? Everything was fine for us up until this point, because whatever you would have gotten from Lavan was rightfully ours. This was going to be our inheritance, and now that we're married to you, so you can take the inheritance, and that's fine for us. But now that Lavan is hearing the complaints of his sons and is no longer going to give what was ours to us or to you via our husband, now we no longer have a part of our father. Okay, so that is what Rabbi Echelon says is the key point, is that there are sons who enter the picture later on. And once these sons are here, they become jealous of Yaakov. They become upset that Yaakov is taking the inheritance that would have gone to them as Lavan's sons. And that's why Lavan has this change of heart where he tries to trick Yaakov and cheat him. Yeah, does everyone think this makes sense? Or
Yeah.
Certainly from just reading the Peshat, it makes a great deal of sense.
yeah. So that was the argument that he wanted to make. And with this, he explains the very curious detail at the end of the parsha. What happens at the very end of the parsha?
Okay.
They have to make
Pasuk
an
Yutet,
exception.
verse 19. V'Lavan halach ligzoz et sono, v'tignov Rachel et hatrafim asher la'aviha.
Yeah.
Rachel steals her father's idols.
Oh, right.
Why does Rachel steal her father's idols?
Has to do with
Well,
his-
lots of reasons
her
have been given.
brothers.
Okay, so what reasons have we heard?
Well, to give him less power if you believe in idols.
To give him less power. How so? What do you mean by give him less power?
If there's going to be a fight, you certainly don't want to have your enemy have their favorite idols around.
Okay, so maybe it's that the idols would give him power, right? The Radak actually says that the idols were like a primitive GPS or tracking system, that he could divine the idols to know where Yaakov was, and so she stole it so Lavan wouldn't be able to chase after them. Rashi says that she did it because she didn't want Lavan, her father, to worship idols anymore, or she thought that she could wean him off of it, or you stop him from doing this, right? Other more academic approaches say, well, maybe Rachel still had some allegiance to these idols, or still saw power in the idols, and so if she's leaving her father's house, she wants to have that spiritual connection of the idols.
She's maybe stealing them to punish her brothers, her so-called brother, half brothers,
Yeah.
whatever, because they would. That's part of their treasure. Those idols to inherit.
So
Yeah.
Especially if they were covered in gold, which a lot of
okay,
them
so
were.
maybe there was monetary value to these idols, right? Interesting question about whether, if that is the case, if you could melt it down, if you could sell the gold and the precious stones, or but yeah, maybe it was a wealth claim, and we'll come back to that, Arthur, in a moment.
I've heard.
Yeah, please.
Sorry, I've heard that it was a kind of a mark of, let's say, a chieftain, that it was,
Right. And that's what they inherited.
a measure of his, I don't know, esteem in the community, maybe kind of like the Yosef's coat with different striped coat, basically. It was a mark that he was the heir, or the, I don't know, chosen.
Okay,
I don't know.
good. We'll come back to that also. What you and Arthur said, we'll come back to. But before we get there, it's quite interesting. There's one more story in Tanakh which Rafim kind of feature prominently. Anyone have any recollection? Or anyone look at the sources and have their memory triggered?
There is a person who comes and steals some idols in the days of, oh boy, I can't remember exactly. It's not in the days of the judges, but
It is the term Trafim?
Yep, the Teraphim. Thank you.
Okay. So the story I had in mind was the story of Michal.
Oh yeah.
Who was Michal? Michal is Shaul's daughter who gets married off to David. So quite interestingly, if you look in source 12, we won't look at all this inside, but so this is right when, remember, David and Shaul start off on great terms, and then Shaul has a change of heart and wants to kill David. This is right when Shaul has this change of heart and starts seeking to actively harm David. So one of the strategies he comes up with is, if I can't get rid of him, bring your enemies even closer. So he says, I'll marry my daughter to him. In that way, David will be close and under my control, and maybe also, then I can send him off as my general, because once he's part of the family, I can trust him, and he'll die in war, and I won't have to kill him. He'll be killed in war, and all my troubles with David will end. So he has this great plan. He says, my oldest daughter, Meirav, I'll give to David. There's a problem, though. Meirav was already about to be married to someone else. So we have kind of an echoing of what happens with Yakov, with Rachel and Leah, with David. So Shaul says, okay, Meirav is already promised to someone else. I guess it's going to have to be Michal. My second daughter will accomplish the same thing as my first daughter. And so Michal marries him. And there's some other interesting textual parallels between the two stories. But anyway, so as things progress, Shaul again wants to a change of heart, or his emotions overcome him. He wants to kill David again. Michal and Yehonatan, right, brother and sister, Yehonatan was David's best friend, get wind of this, and so they want David to escape. And how does Michal help David to escape?
She makes an image of him, in fact, in the bed.
Yeah. So
He also can climb out the window.
the second passage in source number 14. וישלח שאול מלאכים על בית דוד לשמרו להמיתו בבוקר, ותגיד לדוד מיכל אשתו לאמור, אם אינך ממלאת את נפשך הלילה, מחר אתה מומת. So Shaul sends his soldiers, his guards, to kill David. Interestingly, he's going to wait till morning for them to kill him. So Michal says, you better run away right now, because if you stick around here till the morning, you'll be dead. So she helps him lower himself out of the window, and he escapes. She takes the trafim and puts them in the bed. And she takes goat's hair to look like David's hair, covers the trafim with that, and it looks like there's a person sleeping in the bed. The messengers go in the morning. They want to kill David, and there's no David. There's just this idol. So there's some interesting commentary here about what the trafim are.
I have a question.
Yeah.
Michal and David had trafim.
Yeah.
Why?
Yeah. Why? We don't know. So let's look at a couple of these commentators
Okay.
to see what they say. It's quite puzzling. It's quite puzzling. So the Metzudas Sion writes. Sorry, let me scroll down. Ha-trafim, Hem ha'asurim b'tzurat adam. So these are idols that look like people. Mehem la'avodah zara. Sometimes trafim were used for idolatry. Umehem l'tzurat adam yadua. And sometimes they were made. There was no photography. They were made to remember, to look like a familiar person. Hanashim hayu osot al tzurat balehem. Yistakel b'ta'aro me'rov ha'ahava. It was quite common, he says, that women would have trafim commissioned in the image of their husband, so they could look at them and out of their great love for their husband. Okay, presumably, right, the husband was off shepherding, or was off in battle, or doing something else, and so the women who would have these life-size bobbleheads or whatever made of their husbands in order to hold them dear. Others suggest that there might be some sort of fertility thing going on here. Again, whether it's idolatrous or not, no one wants to say that Michal and David were worshiping idols. The academics, the biblical scholars are much more comfortable and don't have much qualm about saying such things. But if not, it was something fertility related, perhaps, was suggested. And that might be why Rachel, maybe there was like each family had their own fertility treatment, we'll call it. And that might be why Rachel took it. So anyway, so we have the trafim. And here let's come to what Nachum Sarna says about the trafim. He's commenting back in our story in Sefer Breshit. What is their function? They have been widely understood as corresponding to the Ilani, the family gods of the Uz household, and to the Roman Penates, the household gods who were thought to protect the food supply and assure the general well-being of the family. That possession of the household gods was connected to birthright or clan leadership is to be inferred from an adoption contract from Nuzi. I really don't know what this refers to, which stipulates if Nashwi has a son of his own, he shall divide the estate equally with Wulu, but the son of Nashwi shall take the gods of Nashwi. However, if now Nashwi does not have a son of his own, then Wulu shall take the gods of Nashwi. Okay, so the point being that in these ancient contracts and ancient laws of inheritance, whoever had the trafim was the one who had the stronger claim to the estate.
Mm-hmm.
In the case of Jacob, the trafim could not have assured inheritance rights since the patriarch claims nothing from Lavan. In any case, is leaving Mesopotamia for good. Rabbi Echelon says, no, Sarna's right up until this last point. Why does Rachel take the trafim? Me and Arthur, you both were kind of hinting at this, is to show that the estate of Lavan is rightfully mine, or rightfully my family, right? Whether it's her or Yakov, who's deserving of the estate, he takes it as a claim on the estate. right? Up until this point, the working assumption has been that Yaakov is going to be the one to inherit Lavan and is the one who has, who helped Lavan amass his wealth, which maybe he didn't have at the beginning of the Parsha. Maybe at the beginning of the Parsha, his flock was small enough that a young girl could tend to it. But now it certainly requires professional shepherds and way more than that. And that's all due to Yaakov, and Lavan admits as such. And if that's the case, then Rachel is taking it as a claim against Lavan, right? And now that the brothers, the sons, are making a stink and saying, no, this is really belongs to us. And so it's the claim, it's the complaints of the Bnei Lavan that turns the whole thing around, according to this understanding of the story. That right? When we first see Lavan, he's really not such a bad guy. He welcomes Yakov into his home. He offers Yakov a salary, a chance to build, to build a life for himself, not just an asylum seeker who's hiding out and doing nothing, right? Marries off his daughters, right? Even what we often see as the problematic issue of switching the daughters at the wedding, he does have a good explanation and justification for that, right? If he truly was a 7-year process, he had every assumption that Leah would have been married off by then. Maybe he should have said something before they were under the chuppah, or before the day after, but he seems to be justified. And it's only once his sons, who are born late, who only emerge later in the story, start making a stink, that Lavan then also has a change of heart in his attitude towards Yaakov and how he's treating him. That's the contention that's being made here.
It always struck me as odd that Rachel was the one who stole the Trufim. I would have expected Leah to be the one to take. If anybody was going to take them, I thought it would have been Leah. Number one, she's the oldest in the family,
right?
And number two, she's snua and knows it, and knows that she's not the preferred one. So maybe she would think, well, if I do this, then I'm ensuring more something or other for my husband. Maybe he will change his attitude towards me.
Right. It's a good question.
Interesting. Yeah.
Hadn't really thought of it, although my initial response is, well, maybe if these are some sort of fertility associated thing, so that was more of Rachel's problem.
Yeah. And it was also David and Michal's problem, because they never had a child.
Right. And also remember what we know from the beginning of the story about the nature of the two sisters is that Rachel in a Leah, Rakot, right? She's though she's the older sister, she's not the one tending the sheep, right? Mm-hmm. She's not the more active. She's not the one who's going to take initiative and take the lead. Maybe there's something with that also. Yeah. But it's an interesting question why it's if it really is a claim on the estate, as Rabbi Echelon wants to say, then it would make more sense that Leah should take it.
Yeah, and she's got a lot more children to provide for than Rachel does.
Right. Although it may, just thinking on my feet here, because it hadn't crossed my mind, this question, is it could also be that, following in the pattern that Yakov has established, that it's, not necessarily birth order that determines who has the claim. And so maybe it's good to support Yaakov and show that he was justified, that it's the younger sibling who takes it and not the older one. But I'd have to think that one through a little bit to see if I really think that or not. It's a good question. Any other questions or comments on this?
I think that that idols are not only things that are spiritual to be worshipped and all that, but our power. Mm-hmm. Power, certainly in community and at home. So I think that they can be very, very valuable.
Yeah.
And possibly also if they're decorated with gold and whatever.
For sure. It's hard for us to really know what the not living in the culture and the time, what the significance of these idols are. It is an interesting claim to say that the idol represents a claim on the estates. It's an interesting take on it, and seems to have some justification. Again, I have very little knowledge of any of these ancient legal texts to know if there's other examples or not, but I thought it was a really creative, interesting approach to the story. And so the upshot of it is again, we have lots of midrashim, lots of gemaras that inform us, but it's always important to go back to the text and see where exactly what the basis for this strong midrashic tradition is about Lavan being the bad guy. And so I think that Rabbi Echelon gives a compelling argument to say that maybe the turning point is when we hear the complaints of Bnei Lavan, of Lavan's sons, who only at this point appear in the story, appear on the scene, and it seems to be about inheritance, money, and power, which we know are very powerful motivating factors in all sorts of contentious issues throughout history. So anyway, this was a different type of Parsha Shir tonight, looking really at Pshat in the Torah and trying to unfold and make sense of a tradition that we have. I hope that you enjoyed it. I really I enjoy these types of shiurim, hearing them and looking back and connecting all the dots in the story. So anyway, we're at the end of our time. I hope everyone enjoys, and we'll see you again next week.
Thank you,
Laila
Rabbi.
Tov.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Very interesting. Thank you.
Erev Tov.
Laila Tov.
Good night.
Tov.
Have a good Shabbos too.